quite a bit to me here, and that's good. That's good. So we've had a lot of questions there, and not even time to address all of them. As Paul says, at the end tomorrow we will have a little bit extra time to discuss some questions. So feel free to save some more for tomorrow, and we can keep going, plowing along there then. Yeah. In the break we were talking. Is it Brian? Yeah, with Brian, and he mentioned that this was how Oprah also left the faith. You want to repeat that because that was interesting. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Brian. Yeah. Okay.
Something real quick about that, because we actually studied that passage in Sunday school, and Paul was there. And whenever we read the word jealous, I just quickly looked up on my Bible app, and I looked at the interlinear translation, and the Greek word for that jealous word was just saying it means that there's no competition. It's like there's no other.
Mm-hmm. He's in a unique category. It's Hebrew, that's in the Old Testament, but yeah, yes, in that sense, if we take the parallel from Isaiah, that he doesn't share this with other gods, so he is placing himself in a unique category. He's the infinite God, and he alone is that.
And I was wondering if that has sort of, saying jealous nowadays maybe has a different sound to it than maybe that idea.
Well, we would use that though in a marriage relationship today, Jay, where we have exclusive in a marriage. There is exclusive rights to each other, and anyone who would intervene in that so God has an exclusive right to our worship. So we do have a human side of that.
Yeah, I like that. That's true. Yep. And so again, I'm just suggesting, I think it is another part, maybe a very attractive part, in way of answering that, is pointing out that God in himself is an intense community between the three. And this is something, this glory that he receives exclusively for himself is yet one that is shared among the three. And so, yeah, I'm thinking that could also be a part of our answer to this. Okay, good. Well, you can think some about this, and we'll move on here a little bit. Beyond self-centeredness, divine interrelatedness as primary. So we're talking about this interrelationships between the three, and they are very important, and maybe we can think about them in a way that is more significant than we might have before. And that brings us back to the question, in what sense is God one? And there have been two ways of answering this in church history. And the one way that we are most familiar with is the way of the Western Church since Gaston, and that is focusing on the divine essence as the unity of God, what unites the three and brings them together, the divine nature. And that's been the way the West has answered this question. Now, the Eastern Church has actually taken a different approach. And they have focused more on the three persons united through relationships. So their unity is one in fellowship and relationship more and first, and while they also agree that they have the same divine nature, but they focus more on the personal side here in beginning to answer this question. Now, we could also say maybe there is some truth in both of these, and I guess that would be something I would suggest. But anyhow, maybe as the Western Church, as we are, we can learn here a little bit from the Eastern Church in their way of reflecting and emphasizing the mutual relationships of the three. So relationships are very important, and maybe relationships are primary. If we say that, what we not mean is that the three get mixed up or confused somehow. They are still being separate persons, centers of self-consciousness, as we may explain what we mean by person, and each has still the divine nature. That's what we traditionally say in answer. However, again, the focus then becomes more on these deep, intimate relationships that the three have with each other. And I have mentioned before, there is also this idea, we'll look at this now for a moment, that they may even be mutually indwelling each other. And there is a Greek and a Latin word for that I'll mention here as well. So mutual indwelling, that's been known in the early church in Greek as perihoresis, and in Latin from the word circumcision. Now, where do we get this from? Let's look at a couple passages in the Gospel of John particularly, where we read John 14:10. Jesus says, "Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own initiative, but the Father residing in me performs his miraculous deeds." And a little later in chapter 17, "Just as you, Father, are in me, and I am in you." That's Jesus in his prayer to the Father. And he also said, "And now, Father, glorify me at your side with the glory I had with you before the world was created." So this verse is also showing us the distinction is maintained. So there are two different here, the Father and the Son, and they were together before the world was created. Yet he's saying now repeatedly that the Father is in the Son and the Son is in the Father. If we were to take that literally, as when we read about the Holy Spirit indwelling us or being in us, then we say the Spirit is indwelling us. If we did that here, we would say there is some way, some sense in which the Father and Son are indwelling each other. But again, we must maintain at the same time the personal independence there. And there again, maybe the parallel with us and the Spirit helps. We are still our own person and remain as a person, while it's still possible that the Spirit somehow indwells us as well. I'll quote Scott Orell again to help us understand some of this. That is, each member of the Godhead in some sense indwells the other, without diminishing the full personhood of each. The essential unity of the Godhead, then, is found both in the intrinsic equality of divine characteristics, that's the answer of the Western Church, and also in the intensely personal unity that comes from mutual indwelling, which is more the answer of the Eastern Church. So in that sense, we are bringing both together again here. The essence, the divine nature, as helping us to see the unity of God, but also the community, the fellowship, the intense community of the three that is also helping us to see the unity among them. And that is what's been called in the Eastern Church with the Greek term perichoresis. So it means this mutual indwelling of the three divine persons. And personhood remains intact. So they are not being confused or eliminated as persons. And again, we could compare this with the believer who is being indwelled by the Holy Spirit and does not be extinguished as a person through this. Okay, so that's the personal interrelatedness of the Trinity. And I like this picture. It is, however, called Meeting Jesus in Heaven, and I would like to rename it somehow and see not the believer here as the one coming into heaven, here received by Jesus, but maybe the Son himself being received by the Father, And therefore, what would happen then if we do that, if we apply this now to our understanding of the Trinity? Well, here, from this Western perspective, we have the Father a little bit more distant with the hands in the background. And I think if we take up some of this Eastern perspective, he comes forward and he comes closer to us. And I would see him more personal then. And I would like to see the Father and the Son here and see their intense community more in the forefront and experience that more. And that would be maybe a little different view of God than we traditionally have in the Western Church, and which actually this picture captures, with the Father being more distant with his hands in the back. Now, some people have observed that this Western way of speaking of the unity of God may have actually led to some things like deism, where the Father becomes even more remote than here. Now, this is a Christian with painting this picture, but we can easily see how, taking this a step further, the Father becomes more and more distant, and we end up what's called deism. Deism meaning that there is a God who created, but he is not close, he's remote, he has withdrawn from us, and we cannot relate to him anymore. And some people suggest that the Western view might have furthered this, this idea about God. And so I would like to bring him a little bit forward again and to see this relationship more in front of our eyes between the Father and the Son and the Spirit as well, and see them maybe more as a divine family a little bit, which is an image the Eastern Church uses. And then we could say we are actually invited into this intimate fellowship, into this community of the Trinity. And this is from a German theologian who's calling this the hospitality of God. He is inviting us to participate with them and to fellowship with them. And we see that in the Gospel of John and places that we have read before, a little bit in the context there, in verse 11 in John 17, Jesus says, I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, keep them safe in your name that you have given me, so that they may be one, just as we are one. So we are invited into this community. And a little later, I am not praying only on their behalf, but also on behalf of those who believe in me through their testimony, that they will all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I am in you. I pray that they will be in us, so that the world will believe that you sent me. So Jesus is praying that we will be in the community of the three. And that's a plurality of community. We will be participating in this community, and we are invited into this community. Comments or questions?
When you say invited into community, explain that just a little bit.
Yeah, it does not mean that we become gods of some sort. Yeah, so that's not what we mean by this. But it does mean that we are invited to commune with each of the three and with the three together, that we are in fellowship with them. We come to the Father through the Son. So we are not just in fellowship with the Son, we are also then in fellowship with the Father. We've used the language of adopted from the Scriptures. We're adopted into the divine family, if you will. And we have this community with the Spirit, with the Father and the Son. Okay, let's think more about what this means then for us and for our lives. If God exists in triune community, what does that mean for mankind created in his image? What are the implications for us from this? Well, first of all, let's think about what it means to be a person, the basis of personhood. Now, what is the basis of personhood? A lot of people in modern psychology, if we ask about this, will maybe encourage us to take a look inside to find myself. But what we usually find when we look inside is not very much. It seems in the end the answer is empty. There is not really something there. We cannot answer this out of ourselves. There is no answer there. Although that's what people tell us where to look. And if we look at the Bible, it's interesting that the Bible does not even have a well-defined set of words for the inner man. There are a lot of different words that are being used to describe who we are. Soul, spirit, body, heart. inwards, and theologians wrestle with that actually. What is the difference exactly, and what does that exactly mean? And maybe that's because we are not to find the answer ultimately for personhood inside of us, and maybe the Bible doesn't even point us that way. Maybe there's another way to look, and as you can imagine, that would be to look not inside but to look upward in order to recover humanity, created in the image of God. And then we would say that only with reference to God can we understand who and why we are. So our understanding of what it means to be a person must be anchored in God Himself. So bottom line, we're not looking inside to find ourselves and define us as persons, but we're looking upward to understand who we are as persons and what personhood means. And here helps us what we have talked about before. There are significant differences, we want to remind ourselves again, between God being infinite and us being finite creatures. The Father, the Son, and the Spirit provide the framework, however, for our own personhood as human beings. So how we are to understand who we are as persons can be guided by our understanding of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. So the basis for personhood is something that we find looking up to God. I'll go a little further, and then we may collectively ask about or wonder or raise some questions here. So another point we may say, and I've called it like this, Gaston versus Strawman. Let me explain what I mean by this. That is the image that people often have about a Christian. That is a caricature, that the believer is really a human disaster. Somebody who has said no to life and has abnegated life. And we would say it is positive that we have died to sin, but it's not positive that if we die to our own humanity. So that's this image maybe of a Christian who cannot enjoy life anymore. And I remember when I went to Bible school, my grandma was shocked, and she told me exactly that. She was like, you cannot love anymore, and you have no more life. And she had this image that this is like a monastery, maybe in the Middle Ages, where life is basically over, and and you cannot enjoy anything anymore. And that is a popular image of a believer, and this life is very sad and not very attractive. And maybe sadly, sometimes we follow this way of life, but that is not something that would image a triune God, who, as we have seen, is very different from that, who is full of authenticity and real relationships and delight and truth. And so what's another way? Well, if we want to image God, the triune God, then the Christian's humanity should come alive, and we should be most fulfilled and authentic of the human race, having deep, intimate relationships. That would be what we should expect if we are to image a God who is like that, because our God is very much alive, and He has very much intimate, deep relationships. So that would be an image of our God. And we could ask about who was the most extraordinary man who ever lived. And even many atheists would agree and say the same that we say, Jesus. Now, why would they say that? Why might an atheist say that?
Extraordinary claims that he made.
Well, maybe, yeah. His great moral teacher, okay. Yeah?
Jesus never seek acceptance or approval by people. They could see that his love, his compassion, his mission was something extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
The power that driven him to the ministry was something very, very unique, and therefore it couldn't be just like from one person. I know Jesus was also God in person, but they could see this power and passion.
Yeah. Now, what we think about very quickly is his deity. But I think for other people, his humanity is very attractive as well. So for these people, they would maybe reject his claim to deity, but they would see his humanity as very, very attractive. The way that he lived, the way that he related, the way that he spoke. That seems very attractive. And if we look in church history, yes, we have to remember everybody always said that Jesus did not only reveal true deity to us, he also revealed true humanity to us. So that means when we look at Jesus, we do not only just see the Father or deity, we also see humanity as it was meant to be. And therefore, we may even say there is a sort of densified, more profound and real humanity that we can see in the person of Jesus. And that's very interesting, because it should tell us something about what it means to become more like this God and to image this God. Right? That would be then the direction we would anticipate to be led and to go. So imaging the triune God, if we distinguish it again from other worldviews, let's take atheism, if we think about personhood there, then human personhood looking inside becomes somewhat arbitrary. There is no real foundation for that. It is just to be found somewhere inside. With pantheism, which is the foundation for several Eastern religions, there is this, the personhood also is something that sort of is in the way. It's not something attractive, something I want to hold on, but something I want to actually get rid of. I want to sort of lose my individual personhood because it separates me from the all-inclusive, a-personal one. And here Christianity stands very much out because it alone affirms as grounded in the three-person God, our own personhood. And I think that actually is quite attractive. We are not about to lose our personhood, become less human. We are about to become more human if we are transferred in the image of Christ. Because Christ himself is real humanity, and he revealed us true humanity. And that is something rather attractive. Okay, so we see, we see many facets of our humanness. We see human reason. We see language that we have. We see the capacity to choose that we have. We see the profound diversity of emotions we as humans exhibit. We see the appreciation of beauty. We see the propensity for creativity, the sense of morality and eternality, social nature, desiring relationships. Okay, so all of that, many, many aspects, things that make us unique, that make us human. And these things are all not neglected or de-appreciated. They are actually profoundly densified in the understanding that our personhood is anchored in God, and that Jesus cherishes these, and he exhibits that himself. So it's something, therefore, that gets cherished and not something that gets neglected or arbitrary. So, imaging the triune God alone provides a plausible explanation and basis for true humanity. And we could add even missions begins with understanding who the God of the Bible is and what it means to be created in his image. Comments or questions on this part? Yes?
I just find it a little bit difficult to comprehend parts of this, even though I can read it in the Bible and I know that it's true. I'm thinking of how I would explain this to somebody that's lost.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, first of all, maybe it's something for us because we see that our personhood then is something that is of value. It is something that God wanted, that he has designed, and that is not being lost in a relationship with God, but that is even brought out more. We are not being lost. And I think then, again, this is an aspect that could be attractive to other people. Because, as I say, in other worldviews, that's not necessarily the case. There it may actually be the goal to lose yourself, because you need to unite yourself with the all-personal the all-inclusive one or something of that sort. Whereas in Christianity, you are not losing yourself, you're not losing your personhood or an identity, but you are bringing it out as God designed it to be. So we're becoming not less human, but we should become more human as we become more like Christ. And so that in itself, I think, is something attractive. Other comments?
Well, I got something else to say, and you find it in the book of Matthew, 16th chapter, book of Matthew, start with verse number 13. And this is what he says. When Jesus come into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?"
Mm-hmm.
And we answered, some said that John the Baptist, some Elias, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And then he said, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered, said unto him, "Blessed art thou, Simon Peter, by Jonah, for flesh and blood have not revealed this unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say unto thee, thou art Peter, upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the key of the kingdom of heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then charged he his disciples that we should tell no man that he was Jesus Christ." Flesh and blood is a human being. I never see a human being don't have flesh and blood.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
Jesus told him, "Blessed
Yeah.
art thou, Simon."
Exactly. And that's why we say he is true.
"Blessed art thou, Simon Peter, by Jonah, for flesh and blood have not told you who I am, but my Father, which is in heaven. He told you who I am."
Yeah.
He reveals God.
Right. That's right. That's how you know. He told you.
Yeah. So God is working in him to make him understand and reveal this. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus is not John the Baptist,
Mm-hmm.
but some say John the Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is not Jeremiah, but some say Jeremiah. Jesus is not Elias, but some say Elias.
Let me ask you a
Mm-hmm.
question.
Mm-hmm.
So how does our knowledge of, what you're teaching about the Trinity change our understanding of the human image of God in man?
Mm-hmm.
You have a list of things. Does the understanding of the Trinity inform that list, add to it?
Mm-hmm.
Do we know more about the image of God in man through?
Yes, we do. So first of all, I guess what I've been saying so far is more the appreciation of that humanity. That is even displayed in Jesus the Son himself, because he is true human and true God. So therefore we see that this is something to be appreciated, okay? But then, yes, the first thing, maybe I can ask you even, thinking about God as we have done in this fellowship of the Trinity, what may that suggest about us, created in his image, and how we may reflect that?
We have a natural desire to have community ourselves.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're longing for this community because we were created in his image. We sort of need this community. Now, something is different between us and God there in meeting this need. But God can meet this need in himself because he is a triune God. Now, we are not triune, we are single persons, and therefore we do need others to actually experience this community and fellowship. So we have a need there. But we do reflect God when we live in community. We cannot fulfill this call and reflect God all alone by ourselves. Something would be missing there. So here is already something that this is telling us in how we ought to live. We need each other to image God in this way, to image the social Trinity in this way. Yeah, but we actually will get to this point here, so maybe won't say more about that yet as we come into this, really. But we have sort of already seen some of it, and we are anticipating here some, and we are building up in this direction. And that's exactly the way we are going now. And now we're thinking about God in community and us imaging Him. And these are the big words for that. So let's look at that. The ability that we have for personal relationships is coming to us by God, because we are given this by His divine design. We are called to image this triune God. So therefore the believer who is reconciled with God is also filled with God's own presence. And again, as I've said before, this does not extinguish our own personhood. We do not stop existing as individual beings. We are still who we are, but we are changed. We are conformed to the divine character and strengthened in our unique individuality. Now, one verse I like a lot from Revelations, and Revelations 5, let's take 9 and 10 here, where we see this diversity in front of the throne. We read in Revelations 5, 9, and 10, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were killed. And at the cost of your own blood you have purchased for God persons from every tribe, language, people, and nation. You have appointed them as a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." So there we see this diversity, and it's something that God rejoices in. He intended it to be there, and He intended to be worshipped in this diversity. And therefore we can cherish that. It is reflective of God. So again, we continue to think about what it means to image this triune God. If we think about the negative side, we could think about demons. If they take control of a person, the opposite happens. This person is enslaved, and if you will, depersonalized. So that's exactly the opposite, and that does not seem very attractive. No, if the Holy Spirit indwells a person, the opposite happens from that. The person is liberated and conformed to the image of Christ. This contrast helps me a little bit understand that, right? So if it's the negative side, then we lose our personality and we're enslaved. Whereas if it is God Himself, He liberates us and He conforms us to His image. There is a book by C.S. Lewis, we've talked about him before, The Great Divorce, that I've read a long time ago, and I don't remember very much of it, but I remember the main idea that he is describing there. Somebody of you read it and may be able to help us. What he's saying there? Anybody? No? Okay, well, so I've read it a long time ago, and he's talking about a bus ride to heaven and to hell. And the difference that he's making is that in hell, in this fictitious bus ride, there is this grayness, and the people who are there are not so much suffering as simply going about their normal business. Yet the appearance of the residents of hell, depending on when they arrived, is increasingly ghost-like and translucent. So they are preoccupied with their selfish lives, and they become utterly light of substance and less persons at all. And then in contrast, when the bus is going to heaven, the residents of heaven, called the solid people here, in this book, are massive, magnificent human beings. They reflect the grandeur and presence of their sovereign. And therefore, so there are more people, if you will. There are the solid people, and the other one are light. So maybe we could say that's not a completely, we could maybe critique that in one way or another, and saying there's more to it than that. But it is true that what he describes here is that those in heaven become actual real persons, and the others are losing their identity, being enslaved and becoming more ghost-like, as he's describing it here. So I like that imagery that C.S. Lewis is using in this book. So when we continue to think about this, the self-giving nature of God has to reflect on us. It has to mean something for our lives as well, as we are created to give from ourselves as well. And this is something we can see, and we can ask ourselves, how do we do that? Now, how does that work, that we can image God in this way? And what is the key to become a true person like Jesus Christ himself? Not becoming God, no, but becoming a true human in the sense that God meant it. Oops, I was too fast here a little bit. So let's first the negative side again, Christian selfishness. When we think about what we preach today, there is a lot of self-serving attitudes. We offer Christianity often because it helps maybe people to be free from problems. Maybe we suggest that people can improve their marriage, maybe their emotional experience, maybe have a happier family, and maybe even success in business. So that is a focus that we can often hear. Now, is that what we see in Scripture? Well, if we look at the themes of Jesus and what he emphasized, there were two great commandments, first of all, that he repeatedly emphasizes. And we know that. We find that, for example, in Mark 12, where he says, Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, Hear, Israel, the Lord, bless you, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. That's something he repeats, love God. And then secondly, and the second like it, is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. So these two commandments are, love the Lord your God, and love your neighbor as yourself. That sounds different from what we've seen about before. And secondly, what's another theme that Jesus brings up a lot? The disciples are to recognize one another by love. We see that, for example, in John 13:45. Everyone will know by this that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And that may remind us already of the triune God himself. He is this community of love, and we are to follow his example here. And we can observe that this admonition or reference to love one another occurs about 24 times in the entire New Testament. And we may also observe that if we are to love one another, we actually need somebody else. We cannot do this on our own. True love always necessitates another who can receive that love. So we cannot fulfill this commandment by ourselves. We need another person to do that. It is impossible to fulfill Jesus' commands by ourselves. And therefore we may imagine this a little bit as a family. Think about a family where you have two who are sharing this love with each other, and they're needed. And in order for their love to be perfected, if you will, they may even need to include or think about including then a third one into their community of love. And then there is this sharing of love. And that is an image and something we know from our experience where love is being seen and lived out. And that is something that would image God and the community of love as well. And I think that gives another value also for this love being shared in community, in the family, and also in the church. So the second most repeated theme by Jesus may be summarized like this: let go of self. That fits in here as well. And we can, for example, see that in Matthew 10:39, where he says, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life because of me will find it. And so this is frequently found in the gospel, this idea of let go of self in many places. And a Cuban evangelist called La Bastida, I don't know much about him, but this is a quote from him. He says, there are three paradoxes of the Christian life. You must give in order to receive, you must let go in order to possess, and you must die in order to live. And so that would be a very different image of God. We see the self-giving God and his nature, and then we see that we often do not exactly proclaim that, but we share Christianity more as a way of solving our problems, whereas the themes of Jesus sound differently and have a lot more to do with reflecting this God who is actually self-giving. So if we are created in His image, we are to also be self-giving, sharing love with one another, and losing ourselves on behalf of others. So in that sense, self-sacrifice is not something like a bonus, maybe for the super apostles, or as we say in German, like the cream on top of something. If we look at the divine example, self-sacrifice is not like that, an extra bonus for the pious or cream, on top of something, like sometimes we may think, but it is something that's more at the center of what we are meant to be and how we are to image our triune God. Self-sacrifice is a human must to fulfill our deep divine design. We are under free obligation, if we call it that, by design. And that again is the difference to God, because God in Himself fulfills that need. He has that community among themselves, but we do not. We need others in order to fulfill this design and to express this. We cannot self-sacrifice alone. We cannot love alone. We need another person in order to do that. And therefore, we need each other, and we need others. And again, we have seen that God Himself is an example for that then. So we are, in the end, coming back to what we said in the beginning, wondering if we are to do as God does. Well, we see now God is not selfish, God is love, God is giving and receiving of love, and we are to image that. We are to follow this example of the Holy Trinity in our self-sacrifice and in our self-giving. So in the end, we end up that we are actually doing what God does. And we are imaging Him by following His example then in self-sacrifice and self-giving. So Jesus does not ask us to do anything which the Father, Son, and Spirit do not practice 1,000,000 times over. So a summary for today. We may say and conclude that the nature of us as man, although fallen, reflects the personal aspects of the divine nature. We do reflect the divine nature. God created us with the ability to be indwelt by Him, and that is something we see in the Trinity itself, and we are invited into this community. And then God created us to mirror the self-giving disposition of the Godhead. And therefore we have seen maybe a first step of what we have talked about here. Thinking about who God is does help us understand why you and I exist, who we are as persons, and how we are to be most fulfilled individually and in our relationship to other people, the natural world, and to our Creator. Questions and comments? Tomorrow we will think more about what that means then collectively, also in the church. But here we have thought about some aspects about what that means individually. Namely, that we are to love one another and to sacrifice, to let go of ourselves. And in that sense, we can fulfill and image this God who does that. He is the one who in Himself, in the community, loves each other and sacrifices. And we can image that individually, but we need each other to do that, really. Comments and questions?